The room smelled like old carpet and stale coffee, the way courtrooms always do, like the weight of every argument ever made inside them had soaked into the walls. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands folded in my lap, and I listened to my wife of 31 years tell a federal mediator that I had never once contributed anything meaningful to our family's financial life. She said it clearly, no hesitation. He was always the quiet one, she told the room, passive, content to let others handle the real work. I didn't move. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on a small water stain on the wall just above the mediator's left shoulder, and I breathed, and I let her finish. That was the moment our son-in-law leaned over to my daughter and whispered something. She nodded. Neither of them looked at me. That part hurt more than anything, my wife said. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My name is Russell Caine. I'm 63 years old. I spent 32 years as a forensic accountant with the federal government, the last 14 of those as a senior investigator with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I have sat across tables from people who laundered money through restaurant chains, people who hid assets in shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, people who thought they were untouchable because they had expensive lawyers and complicated spreadsheets. I retired early, not because I had to, because my wife asked me to. That was 4 years ago. Her name is Miriam. We met when I was 31 and she was 28 at a church potluck in Falls Church, Virginia, of all places. She had brought a green bean casserole and I had brought nothing because I didn't know it was that kind of event. She laughed at me for it. I thought she had a remarkable laugh. We were married 11 months later. For most of those 31 years, I thought we were happy. I know that sounds naive. I know how it reads now. But I genuinely believed it. We had built something together. A house in Annandale we'd paid off by the time we were in our early 50s. 2 kids who turned out well despite my long hours and frequent travel. A modest investment portfolio I'd managed myself since the early 90s. Nothing flashy. Solid. The kind of wealth that doesn't look like wealth from the outside. Miriam ran the household. That was always the arrangement. I handled the money, she handled everything else. Except over time, everything else expanded, and my handling of the money shrank, and somewhere in the years between our youngest leaving for college and my retirement, the arrangement shifted in ways I either didn't notice or told myself not to worry about. She opened a joint account I didn't know was a joint account until 18 months in. She moved our emergency fund into a brokerage account registered under both our names and her sister's name. Her sister, Claudette, who I had never particularly trusted and never said so out loud because it wasn't my place, or so I told myself. She started making decisions about our rental property, a duplex in Herndon we'd owned since 2003, without mentioning them to me until they were already done. I said nothing. I noticed. I documented. But I said nothing out loud because I told myself I was being paranoid, because I told myself Miriam had earned my trust, because I told myself we were in this together and she wouldn't do anything to hurt us. I was right about one of those things. The retirement was her idea. She'd been after me about it for 2 years before I finally agreed. She said I was tired, which was true. She said the work was aging me, which was probably also true. She said we had enough, which was true in a different way than she meant it. She meant we have enough for a comfortable life. I understood it later to mean I have positioned enough that I can move without you noticing. The first year of retirement was fine, or it felt fine. We traveled. We visited our son in Portland, our daughter in Reston. We spent a week in the Outer Banks with Miriam's family, including Claudette, whose new husband I had never met, and whose financial situation seemed suddenly and dramatically improved from the last time I'd seen her. I didn't ask. I watched. The second year, things started to surface. A bill from an attorney in McLean arrived at the house addressed to Miriam. She said it was nothing, estate planning. She was getting our wills updated. I asked if I should be involved in that conversation. She said she'd handle it. It was routine. She didn't want to bother me with paperwork. I took a photograph of the envelope with my phone. The attorney was not an estate planner. He specialized in asset protection and business formation. 2 months later, I found paperwork in the drawer of her nightstand. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the ibuprofen she keeps there that referenced a limited liability company registered in Delaware. The registered agent was Claudette's husband. The managing member was listed as M. Caine. I put the paperwork back. I took photographs. I didn't sleep much that night. I want to be clear about something because I know how this reads. I know it looks like I should have confronted her immediately. I know it looks like a man who says nothing while his wife maneuvers around him is either a fool or complicit. But I had spent 32 years watching people who confronted too early lose everything they were trying to protect. I had seen cases collapse because the subject was tipped off and moved assets before investigators could freeze them. I knew what premature confrontation looked like. I knew what patience looked like, and I knew which one won. So I was patient. The filing came on a Thursday in March, 14 months after I retired. I was in the garage when my phone buzzed with an email notification from our bank. It was a transfer confirmation for $240,000, moved from our joint money market account into an account I didn't recognize. I stood there in the garage holding my phone for a long time. Then I called a friend of mine, a man named Aldous Webb, who had been my supervisor at CID for 6 years before he retired and went into private practice as a forensic consultant. I told him what I was looking at. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been documenting?" 14 months, I told him. He said, "Then you're ahead of it. Don't move yet. Let me make some calls." I went inside. I made dinner. Miriam came home from her sister's and asked what I made, and I said chicken, and she said that smelled good, and we ate together at the kitchen table the way we had eaten together for 3 decades, and I watched her face and thought, "You still think I don't know." That evening she told me she thought we should talk about restructuring some of our assets. Tax purposes, she said. Just some consolidation. She'd been talking to a financial advisor. I asked which advisor. She named someone I'd never heard of. I nodded. I said that sounded reasonable. The next morning, I went to see Aldous in person. What followed was 3 months I will not describe in full detail, because some of it is still part of a separate matter I cannot discuss publicly. What I will say is this. By the time Miriam filed for divorce in June, I had a clear picture of approximately $380,000 moved through various accounts and entities over the previous 26 months. I had bank records, transfer logs, LLC filings, and correspondence. She filed for divorce on a Friday. By the following Tuesday, I had retained my own attorney, a woman named Patricia, not the same Patricia from anyone else's story, I assure you, just a very competent family law attorney in Fairfax County, and I had provided her with a banker's box of documentation. My attorney looked at the box. She looked at me. She said, "Were you an accountant?" "Forensic," I told her. "Federal." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "They don't know who they're dealing with, do they?" I said I didn't think so. She almost smiled. The mediation session was Miriam's idea. Her attorney had suggested it as a way to avoid the messier parts of a full divorce proceeding. I agreed to it, on advice of my own counsel, who believed it was better to let them feel in control of the room for a little while. Our daughter Joel came with Miriam. I had not known she would be there until I walked in. She sat beside her mother, a little behind her, the way children sit when they've been told one version of a story long enough to believe it. Her husband, a man named Perry, who I have always found decent, if not particularly perceptive, sat on the other side of her. He looked uncomfortable. He had the expression of a man who had been told what to think and was not entirely settled in that thinking. Miriam's attorney presented first. His presentation was confident and contained 2 significant claims. First, that I had historically controlled the family's finances in ways that left Miriam without independent financial knowledge or recourse, and second, that the assets currently in question had been accumulated primarily through her efforts in managing the household and her growing involvement in a family investment initiative she had developed. That second point was creative. I'll give them that. Then she said it. Miriam, not the attorney. She turned slightly in her chair, not quite looking at me, and said to the mediator, in a voice that was very steady, that she had spent 31 years with a man who was, by his own admission, disengaged and passive. A man who left everything to her because he was, in her words, too checked out to be useful. Joelle didn't react to that, which told me she had heard a version of it before. Perry shifted in his seat. I kept looking at the water stain. The mediator, a retired judge named Harlan, older than me, with the kind of face that has seen everything twice, let Miriam finish. Then he let her attorney finish. Then he sat back in his chair. He looked at the folder in front of him, the one my attorney had submitted the week before. He looked at Miriam's attorney. And he said in a very even voice, "Counselor, I want to make sure I understand the position you're advancing here. You're describing your client's husband as someone without meaningful financial engagement in this marriage." The attorney said yes, that was correct. The mediator said, "Are you aware that Mr. Caine holds senior certification from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners and spent 14 years as a supervisory forensic accountant with IRS criminal investigation?" The attorney paused. It was a short pause, less than 3 seconds, but I have sat in enough rooms to know what a person looks like when a floor drops out from under them, and that was what it looked like. We were aware he was in accounting? Yes. "And are you aware," the mediator continued, setting down his reading glasses, "that the LLC you referenced in your opening, the one registered in Delaware with a managing member listed as M. Caine, was incorporated using a notarized signature that, according to the document examiner's report in this folder, does not match your client's signature on file?" The room went very quiet. I heard Joel exhale. I did not look at her. Not yet. Miriam's face had gone the color of old paper. Her attorney said he was not aware of a document examiner's report. My attorney said pleasantly that she had submitted it as Exhibit F in last Tuesday's filing, and perhaps he'd like a moment to review it. What followed was not a dramatic courtroom revelation, not the way it happens in movies. It was more uncomfortable than that, and more human, and in some ways worse. Miriam's attorney asked for a recess. We took 40 minutes. When we came back, his presentation had changed considerably in tone. Joelle did not speak during the session itself. Perry asked very quietly at one point if he could see the folder. My attorney looked at me. I nodded. He read about 6 pages and then set it down and didn't look at Miriam for the rest of the session. The mediation did not resolve anything that day. There was too much to untangle, but the shape of things had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Afterward, in the parking lot, Joel caught up with me as I was walking to my car. I heard her footsteps and slowed down but didn't stop. She fell into step beside me. We walked like that for a while, not speaking. The parking lot was one of those big gray expanses that feels too open, too exposed, the kind of place where there's nowhere to hide from whatever you're about to say. She said, "Dad." I said, "I know." She said, "I didn't." She told me you'd checked out, that you'd left her to handle everything alone for years, that the money stuff was all her. I said, "I know what she told you." She stopped walking. I stopped too. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I had thought about that question for months. I had rehearsed answers to it in the car, in the garage, on the back porch, at night when I couldn't sleep. All of them sounded like excuses. None of them captured the real reason. The real reason was that she was my daughter, and Miriam was her mother, and I did not want to be the man who handed his child a box of evidence against her own mother and asked her to choose a side. I did not want her to carry that. I had spent 32 years deciding what information people needed and what information they didn't, and the calculation I kept arriving at was, Joel doesn't need to carry this, not until it's over. I told her that. She was quiet for a long time. The afternoon light was doing that thing it does in late spring in Northern Virginia, soft and golden and sideways, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. She said, "That wasn't your decision to make, Dad." I said, "Maybe not, but it was the decision I made." She didn't hug me that day. That was okay. I hadn't expected her to. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not anger, not forgiveness, something more complicated than either, and then she turned and went back to where Perry was waiting by their car. Perry caught my eye over the roof of the car. He gave me a small nod, just one, brief, like he was acknowledging something he couldn't say out loud. I drove home alone. There are things I've learned in 63 years that I wish someone had told me at 30. One of them is that silence is not the same as surrender. I know that now better than I've ever known it. But I also know the version of it I practiced for too many years wasn't the right kind of silence. Silence as patience. Silence as strategy. Those are real. I still believe in them. But silence as avoidance. Silence as a way of telling yourself that not addressing something is the same as managing it. That's something else. That was my failure. I didn't intervene when I first noticed things shifting, not because I was strategic, because I was tired and I trusted too easily, and I told myself that a woman I had loved for 3 decades couldn't be doing what I was slowly watching her do. That denial cost me, not the money. The money was recoverable, mostly. The cost was the years, and the distance with my children, and the version of my marriage I had continued to believe in, past the point where believing in it was honest. My son, who lives in Portland, called me 2 days after the mediation. He had spoken to Joel. He didn't ask many questions. He said, "Dad, I just want to make sure you're okay." I said I was getting there. He said, "I know who you are, Dad. I've always known." I didn't say anything to that. I just held the phone and let it land. Some things don't need a response. The financial matter is still being resolved as of this writing. My attorney tells me we're in a strong position. The Delaware LLC is being unwound. The funds transferred to Claudette's husband are the subject of a separate proceeding I'm not going to discuss here. There will be more sessions, more paperwork, more gray parking lots, and stale coffee. That's fine. I've sat in harder rooms. Joelle called me last week. She'd made pot roast, she said, and there was too much of it, and did I want to come over Sunday? I said I did. We sat at her kitchen table, the 4 of us. Joelle, Perry, their youngest, who is 8, and has no idea any of this is happening, which is exactly the way it should be. And we ate, and her daughter told me about a project she was doing for school about the solar system. And I told her that when I was her age, I had memorized all the planets in order, and could she do that? And she said yes, she could, and she did. It wasn't a resolution, not a clean one. It was a pot roast and a kid reciting the planets, and Perry quietly washing dishes while Joel walked me to my car. It was Joel saying, at the door, "Same time next week," in a voice that was trying, genuinely trying, to build something back from whatever shape it was currently in. I said yes. Same time next week. I drove home in the dark, past the neighborhoods I've known for 30 years, past the church where I met a woman with a remarkable laugh at a potluck in 1992, past all the geography of a life I'm still in the middle of, and I thought, you don't rebuild things by explaining them. You rebuild them by showing up. Sunday after Sunday, pot roast or not. That's the only strategy I know that actually works. I keep coming back to that parking lot. The gray concrete, the late spring light going sideways, Joel walking beside me without saying anything for a long stretch before she finally did. There's a version of that moment I used to replay where I said the right thing immediately, where I had the perfect words ready, and she understood everything in 60 seconds and we embraced, and that was that. But that's not how any of it went, and I think I'm glad it didn't. The real version was harder and more honest, and honest is the only thing that actually holds. What Miriam did had consequences, not because the universe runs on punishment, but because actions have weight and weight eventually lands somewhere. She moved money through accounts she thought I couldn't trace, built structures she thought I wouldn't recognize, told our daughter a story she thought would go unchallenged. Every one of those choices rested on a single assumption, that I was exactly who she'd described me as: passive. Checked out, not worth accounting for. She was wrong, and the consequences that followed weren't justice delivered from outside. They were just the natural result of a plan built on a false premise collapsing under its own weight. I've thought a lot about where I failed in this, because I did fail, and I think it matters to say so clearly. I was not passive in the ways she claimed, but I was passive in other ways. The ways that let a slow erosion go unaddressed for too long. The ways that told myself, not yet, when what I meant was, I don't want to deal with this. That kind of avoidance isn't strength. It isn't strategy. It's just a quieter form of giving up. What I eventually did right wasn't a documentation, the attorney, the folder my counsel submitted as Exhibit F. What I did right was refuse to let the false version of me stand uncorrected in that room. That took something I hadn't fully exercised in years, the willingness to show up as what I actually was, not what was convenient. The thing about spending 3 decades doing the work I did is that you develop a particular respect for evidence. Not just financial records, evidence of character, of pattern, of what a person does when they think no one with any standing is watching. Miriam had watched me for 31 years and concluded I was someone she could route around. That was a failure of attention on her part, yes, but it was also a failure of communication on mine. I had let the real version of myself become invisible, and invisible things are easy to misrepresent. Joelle called it correctly when she said the decision about what to tell her hadn't been mine to make. She was right. I had protected her from information she was entitled to, and in doing so I'd left her without the context she needed to see clearly. That cost her something too. Not just trust in her mother, trust in her own perception. When the folder came out in that room and the story she'd been given collapsed, she wasn't just processing betrayal from Miriam. She was recalibrating everything she thought she knew. That's a harder thing to recover from than a simple lie. What I know now, at 63, sitting at my daughter's kitchen table on Sunday evenings while her youngest recites the planets in order, is that the life you actually build is made of smaller decisions than you think. It's the choice to keep records when something feels wrong. It's the choice to call a trusted friend before acting. It's the choice to walk back into a room and let the truth be what it is, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you'd rather just let it go and be done. Those aren't dramatic choices. They don't feel significant when you make them. But over time, they accumulate into either something solid or something hollow, and you don't get to choose which one after the fact. Russell Caine showed up to that mediation session with a banker's box and 32 years of expertise and the willingness to sit quietly while someone misrepresented him, because he knew what was in the folder. That wasn't passivity. That was a man who had finally decided that being unseen was no longer acceptable, and who had done the work, the real unglamorous paper trail work, to make sure that when he was finally seen, what they saw was true. Sunday after Sunday. That's how you rebuild what's worth keeping.